Hi, I'm Joe Ellison, and I'm here to read the first excerpt from my latest novel, Mr. Lake. Mr. Lake is available now on Amazon Kindle. Even I don't have a paperback edition yet, but the paperback is coming out real soon. Well, we might as well get to the excerpt without further ado, because in it, our narrator, young Joe Marino, is going to explain everything to you. Here we go. This is from chapter 1, which is entitled Two Fathers. It was 1966. I was 12 years old. We were back in school after the summer, the George Edward Porter Elementary School. I was in the 6th grade. The Porter School was a brick building, 2 stories tall, like a pillbox. On the inside, it looked taller. It had high ceilings, twice as high as at home. Our teacher was Miss Bazarian. Our janitor was Mr. Lake. His office was in the basement. The ceilings weren't so high down there. Mr. Lake was in his office every day while we were out at recess. After recess, we boys lined up and filed back into the building through the basement door. We walked past his office. I always looked. He was always there. The basement was the fallout shelter. Spray painted on the cinder block wall next to Mr. Lake's door was a sign that said, Fallout Shelter, capacity 300. Under the sign stood a row of 6 olive-colored 55-gallon drums full of civil defense water. In case of nuclear attack, we'd have plenty to drink. Mr. Lake lived in a white clapboard house across the street from the school playground. He lived there alone, except for his cat. I thought it was odd, Mr. Lake owning a cat. Men mostly own dogs. I was a man almost, and I had a dog. Old ladies own cats. Old ladies fuss over cats. I don't know why. Men and dogs know cats don't care. They don't care if you die. They just go look for their next meal ticket. So I thought it was odd. Turned out it was. In addition to the cat, Mr. Lake had an old car. A used, beat-up, hospital wall green Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. It was half the size of our Chevy. My dad said the Ghia had a little lawnmower engine tucked into its trunk. He said it was a joke compared to the big block V8 under the Chevy's hood. But it got Mr. Lake around. Most of the time, he left it parked in front of his house. I broke Mr. Lake's windshield one day. Even though it was late in the season, the guys and I were playing ball in the schoolyard after school. I hit a liner foul. The first baseman let it get by him. He could have knocked it down, but he didn't. It flew straight across the street and hit Mr. Lake's windshield. Cracked it. Everybody ran. I ran. That night after dinner, Dad found out about it. It was one of those things dads always find out about. He pulled off his belt and he gave me a strapping. Not because I broke the windshield, he said, but because I ran. When it was all over, Dad hitched up his pants and dragged me to Mr. Lake's house. We stepped up onto his rickety front porch. If I'd sneezed at it, I would have blown the porch off the house. That's how rickety it was. Dad pushed the doorbell button. Nothing happened. He knocked on the door. It took a while, but the door creaked open. There was Mr. Lake standing in the doorway. He looked small in front of my dad. It was another odd thing about him. Up till then, I never would have called Mr. Lake small. If Sergeant Joe Friday, the cop on Dragnet, had asked me, was he small? I would have said, no. But if he asked me, was he big? I would have said, no. He wasn't fat, and he wasn't thin. He wasn't dark, and he wasn't light. He wasn't tall and he wasn't short. He was run-of-the-mill, ordinary. So ordinary it was like you didn't see him at all. Cops hate that. One thing you could say about him: Mr. Lake was old. You could tell that for sure. Not so much by his gray hairs. Maybe he didn't have too many. Not because he had wrinkles all over his face. He had a few of those. No, you could tell by his old clothes and how he fit into them. Standing there in the open door, with his old dusty red sweater unbuttoned in front and frayed at the cuffs, he looked as crumpled as it did, as if he'd slept in it. He stretched his crumpled neck. "Can I help you?" he said. That was the third odd thing. Mr. Lake had a crumpled voice, old, but not little old lady old. Old like the ocean when it laps against the beach at low tide. Old like it's always been there. Old like it's behaving itself right now. But you better keep your eye on it. Well, if you'd like to keep your eye on what happens next to Joe Marino and his pals, then you'll just have to buy yourself a copy of Mr. Lake. Now, if you are watching this video on its YouTube video page, down below in the description, you'll see a link to the Kindle version of Mr. Lake, and hopefully at some point to the paperback version as well. If you would like, you'll also find links to my other works and my social media pages, my Amazon author page, my website, etc., etc. And if you could, it would please me greatly if you would subscribe and click on the like button. Of course, if you'd like to hear me reading other excerpts from my other works, you can click on one of the boxes to either side of my head. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for stopping by, and I hope to see you again real soon.